Tonight, the truth about fat. How much should we really eat?
The evidence is simply not there to demonise either total fat or saturated fat.
We have very good evidence that links high intakes of saturated fat with an increase in cholesterol levels. We also know that having high cholesterol is a risk factor for heart disease.
Good evening and welcome to the Tonight programme. For decades we've been told that saturated fats are bad for us, and eating too much red meat, milk, cheese and a whole host of other foods isn't good for our hearts. But new research claims the guidelines might not be right, and that's caused a storm of protest. Jonathan Maitland investigates the controversy and asks whether a high-fat diet can ever be healthy.
I'm 54 and I've been brought up on the basis that a diet that's high in fat is bad for us. Public health advice largely born from studies by American scientist Dr. Ansel Keys in the 1950s, who studied the link between saturated fat and heart disease.
Of 10 men, we can expect 5 to get it. But we can't say who, or when, or why.
Public health advice still maintains that the average man shouldn't eat more than 30 grams of saturated fat a day and the average woman no more than 20 grams. But which foods you get that fat from seems to be key, and some academics now argue that the guidance on how much we should eat lacks the solid scientific trials needed to back it up. Thank you. Now, as someone who's very partial to the icing on the cake and the crackling on the pork, I was delighted to hear that fat might not be as bad for us as was previously thought. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could eat tons more of this kind of stuff than we used to think? Or is that all a bit pie in the sky? I don't think she's going to say that I can eat more burgers and chips, but I'm having lunch with Zoe Harcombe, one of the people behind a controversial report concluding that 30-year-old guidance on saturated fat is wrong. And mine has more fat on it.
I'll fight you for it.
Yes, which of course is the reason we're here. Why are you so convinced, first of all, that the original advice about fat, the original trials, was flawed?
There were so many things that we found in this study that were just astonishing. One was that there were only 6 trials, so we tested no women, we tested hardly any healthy people, so the evidence is simply not there to demonise either total fat or saturated fat.
So what you're saying is, you know, we've got to eat something and we're better off eating saturated fat than, say, very high-carb, sugar-loaded, artificial processed stuff.
We're definitely better off eating real food than fake food, and what we've done by demonising fat and the real foods that it comes in is drive people down the route of eating more processed foods. And of course, as soon as the government said eat less fat, at the same time they said eat more carbohydrate. You have to, because you've got to replace the fat with something, and we need to look at the consequences of what's happened since we've done that.
So what you're saying is a bit like Dr. Atkins's low-carb advice, but reheated.
It's not about low carb or high fat, it's about eating real food. So I look at that and I see the B vitamins, I see the fat-soluble vitamins, I see zinc in fantastic proportions. I see it for the nutritional things that it contains.
But I see a non-balanced diet. I see a plate full of meat.
But I see what I need as a human being.
Yeah, but you need vegetables and fruit as well.
The vegetables do bring something to the table, the fruit not necessarily so. Fruit is very much sugar with a few nutrients, far less than you would think.
So you would say, you know, bung some vegetables on that and you're well away.
Absolutely. What you don't need to put on there are the bread and potatoes that nutritionally bring very little to the table, but we are finding them to be fattening. We're in the midst of an obesity epidemic, an epidemic of type 2 diabetes, and it's not that causing either of those.
Figures like Zoe, who make claims about our diet, are often viewed as controversial.
Aha.
So this is a typical Atkins diet breakfast. Back in 2002, I met Dr. Atkins, whose low-carb, high-fat diet was deemed to be the new big thing at the time.
We do want you to enjoy your diet.
I was wondering about that. I mean,
Heavy cream.
people are going to have a heart attack just watching you do that, pouring that kind of thick cream
If that
into a
would
coffee.
be the case, it's because they've been eating carbohydrates all their life and made their heart weak.
Across the pond, investigative journalist Nina Teicholz subscribes to what Dr. Atkins and Zoe Harcombe are saying, and she believes more, not less dietary fat is what leads to better health, wellness and fitness.
Hi, can I have some of the sausages? Your Italian sausages, sweet, like 6 of them? Nice. You know, they trim all the fat off the meat now, but it used to be that, you know, fatty, richer meat that tastes better is marbled with fat and actually tastes much better.
With a little help from technology, I caught up with her to discuss her research. Hi Nina, how are you?
Hello, nice to see you.
The official advice, both here in the UK and in America, is to kind of not overdose on saturated fats, if you like. That's not wrong advice, is it?
There's no reason to avoid saturated fats. That's the point. We put saturated fats in jail based on faulty science. And I'm saying, let them out of jail. If you want to eat bacon every morning or you want to eat eggs every morning, there's no science to show that that's bad for your health.
Really? I mean, that's kind of very counterintuitive because most people would think, hey, I can't eat, large amounts of saturated fat every day. It's just bad for me.
The idea is that saturated fat causes heart disease. That idea has been challenged seriously by scientists today.
Yeah, but saturated fat makes you fat.
Oh, that's a different subject.
So Nina, if what you're saying is true, why don't the public health bodies change their advice and make it more in tune with yours?
Well, basically, we're in the 3rd generation now of a universe of researchers who believe saturated fats are bad for health. That is very hard to back out of. That's the simple answer.
So really, this all comes under the heading, carbs are the enemy.
Right. I do not know exactly what causes obesity, heart disease, and diabetes. I don't think anybody does. But clearly there's a growing body of scientific evidence now that points the finger at carbohydrates.
Nina's diet might be unusual, but could our fear of fat and what we've replaced it with harm us more? Official guidance still maintains that carbs such as potatoes, cereals, pasta, rice and bread should make up around 1/3 of the food that people eat. But what about fat? The British Heart Foundation believe that Zoe's findings shouldn't mean that guidance should be reversed.
What we have to look at is this. So we have very good evidence that links saturated fat intakes, high intakes of saturated fat, with an increase in cholesterol levels. That's one body of evidence. We also know that having high cholesterol is a risk factor for heart disease. And that's really the basis of the evidence.
What's the official British Heart Foundation advice about eating fats and saturated fats and the like?
Yeah, so we base our advice on national guidance, national dietary guidance. So our advice is to reduce the fat you're eating if you're eating a lot of fat, but for most people it's about switching from saturated fats to unsaturated fats to just get the balance of fats right in the diet.
So, who's right? 5 volunteers are going to eat a diet high in fats from non-processed foods provided by GP Dr. Aaron Ghosh. It'll mean eating lots of fat and cholesterol from natural foods like avocados, full-fat milk, eggs, oily fish, meat, as well as lots of fruit and veg, but easing off on the carbs. It's only for 7 days, but let's see if eating lots and lots of fat from natural sources has any impact on their cholesterol and the fats in their blood. Let's meet the volunteers before they get started. Barbara is a 41-year-old facilities manager who lives in Manchester.
A high-fat diet, to me, sort of is red meat, steak with loads of fat around it, lamb chops, sausages. I mean, that, to me, is fantastic news.
Paul is 58 and an electrical consultant.
I wouldn't say I have any weaknesses with food. I don't eat loads and loads of sweets. I don't eat lots and lots of chocolate. I think I have a fairly balanced diet.
Cara is a 42-year-old mother of 2 who runs a catering business from home.
My downfall when it comes to food are sweets, particularly jelly sweets. I could eat them for England, and I know that sugar is bad.
Anne-Marie is a single mum of 3 and likes to keep busy.
I'm quite active. I like to do me a couple of exercise classes a week. Generally, I think people describe me as always on the go.
And Pedro is a 45-year-old former dancer who now fits dance floors.
I don't really have any worries or concerns about this diet. I'm actually really looking forward to it because I know I need it. I need something more to work on losing this extra little bit of weight. So I'm actually excited about the diet.
Before they start, each candidate is being weighed and measured to calculate their body mass index.
173.2.
And will have what's called a full lipid screen of their blood.
What we're going to do though to start with is we're going to get a blood test to see what your fat levels actually are. So it's a breakdown of something called lipids, which are the good and the bad fats.
We'll catch up with our volunteers later.
Okay.
We all need a range of fats in our diets. We probably should have a little bit less of the saturated fats, definitely as little or as none of the synthetic trans fats as possible. And if we're going to have more, we probably should have more of the monounsaturated fats, those things like olive oil, rapeseed oil, which is also known as canola oil. We talk about the idea of good fats and bad fats, and that's probably not a good way of looking at things, because all foods will contain a variety of types of fats.
It's useful, I think, to see what kind of a diet the Keep Fit Brigade favour, but it varies, doesn't it? Because some of them favour a diet that's high in protein, others like a diet that's strong on carbohydrate. But can a diet that's high in fat ever be considered healthy?
So, can you eat fat and be fit? Terry Conway is an endurance runner who runs up to 100 miles a time on a healthy, high-fat diet.
I first started running, I continued with the high-carb diet, and I just found they just didn't suit me. I would have a bloated stomach all the time, my energy levels would be up and down. So through that I just started looking at different types of nutrition. And for me personally, when I started trying the high-fat diet, it just worked, everything clicked together. I felt stronger, I felt healthier, my running became better, and recovery as well is key. I recover a lot faster now. It was a long time before I became fully fat adapted. It wasn't a case of 3 or 4 weeks, it was more 6 to 12 months. It's a long-term commitment. The biggest challenge is the cravings. Some things were easy, cutting out bread and pasta, which I was really surprised about because prior to going onto a high-fat diet, I would eat a lot of pasta and a lot of bread. It was a staple part of my diet because that's what I thought I needed to run high mileage. But as soon as I stopped eating it, I felt instantly better.
So Terry seems to be getting what he needs from a high-fat diet, but does this make any sense? Time to ask the experts.
If you're an ultra-endurance runner, yeah, you can adapt to fat because the way your body's working, that will be less an issue. But if you're working in a high intensity, say as a sprinter or playing football where it's intermittent, it might not work as well. And athletes can adapt, because they're fit, they're trained, and sort of mentally conditioned to perform. So if they're working on a diet that they feel is good for them, they may perform better.
We've got a guy who runs 100 miles at a time on healthy fats, 100 miles at a time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm not saying that proves that, you can live on a diet of healthy fats, but he's onto something, isn't he?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know enough about what else he eats. Does he only eat fat? I think that's probably unlikely. And I think, everyone's got an example of one person who has an extreme lifestyle, whether that be extreme in terms of running 100 miles or whether it's about, somebody who lived till they were over 100 and they smoked, they didn't do any exercise, they ate, a terrible diet.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that for most of us, that will be the path that we follow.
So while Terry Conway has probably been running hundreds of miles, how are our volunteers getting on with their diet?
It's been a real treat to have the porridge in the morning with full-fat milk. It tastes so much better. For me, I'm not a great smoked fish eater, so the worst thing for me was with the kippers and the smoked mackerel that were in the bag.
I've not actually tried the herring rolls yet. I keep looking at them like, we'll do that tomorrow. The avocado, I've never tried before. I found that quite hard and tasteless. But as for everything else, it's not been too bad.
I'm feeling okay. I don't notice any difference. I haven't had any dips or any lows or anything like that, but I haven't been that long into the diet yet, so it's still early days, but excited for it.
Right, our volunteers have been on their special diet for a week now. Very enjoyable, I'm sure, but it's time to find out what it's done to their health. So we're back at that private hospital in Liverpool where we started, just to run the numbers and see how they've got on. They all had a blood test this morning, and Dr. Ghosh has got back the data and is now comparing their blood from 7 days ago before they started their diets. How has eating healthy fats affected their health and weight? Has it been this week?
It's been really good. It's not been a huge change in a lot of ways because I have a diet that's got lots of meat and fish and chicken in it anyway, and lots of fruit and veg. Probably the biggest change is the lack of wine and the lack of carbohydrate, or a smaller amount of carbohydrate. So whole grain rice rather than pasta and bread.
It was pretty easy. I really enjoyed it. The avocado and the flaxseed, and it was good.
By about the 4th day, I felt a little bit tired, a little bit drained. I wasn't sure I was maybe coming down or something, but by Monday I was back to a normal self.
Yeah, I didn't have any dips at all. I just felt great all the time. If I had a little tired dip, then I'd have a handful of nuts or some of the dark chocolate, and that just gives you a great boost.
I think it's been really good. I've ate healthier this week than I normally would. Great variety of food to choose from. And I haven't been eating, and I've been very conscious of what I eat, which I thought was, for me, better than what I used to eat.
So they all seem fairly happy with the diet. Let's see the results. Cara's cholesterol was 5.2, it's now 4.8, and she lost 2 kilograms in weight. Pedro's cholesterol was 6.1, is now 5.7, and he lost half a kilo. Anne-Marie's cholesterol and weight stayed the same. Paul's cholesterol was 7.0, it's now 6.8, and he lost half a kilo. And Barbara's cholesterol stayed the same, but she lost 2 kilograms.
Well, I'm really pleased to say that you've had probably one of the biggest changes in your biochemistry.
Okay.
We've seen a drop in your cholesterol. So you started with your cholesterol being slightly over 5.2, and it's come back down now to 4.8.
Wow.
But more importantly, the bad fats in your actual body, so the LDL fats, those that are linked, that we know to as a risk factor for coronary heart disease, have dropped from 3, which is actually borderline dangerous,
Okay.
to 2.7. So it's come down for us.
And will you do this diet exclusively now, the high fat thing, or will you incorporate bits of it into it?
I'll incorporate bits into my normal diet.
So this has made a difference?
I think it could have made a difference, yeah.
Well, Pedro, you were actually my star pupil this week. You've done the best out of everyone in terms of lowering your cholesterol. I can tell that prior to starting this diet, your diet was probably full of convenience foods, maybe some foods that gave you fast energy, things that you grabbed on the road, as you said. And by simply going on this diet, you've dropped your cholesterol from 6.1 to 5.7. That's the biggest drop we've seen in anyone. So I would actually ask you to continue with this, because I would like your cholesterol below 5. It's one of the risk factors, high cholesterol, towards heart disease. And we know you're so fit and active that there's, very little chance, but we would like to get everything as perfect as we can.
Are you going to approach a piece of steak with a bit more joy in your heart now?
Probably, yeah. Yeah.
So the message from this week is you're going to reduce the carbs and just up the saturated fat a bit.
Yeah, just a little bit, yeah.
How have you found it this week?
I found it really, really good. I ate healthier, probably cut out processed foods. That's what I noticed, that basically I'm cooking.
So overall, it looks like everyone's had a good experience of eating healthy fats from non-processed foods, and some even reduced their cholesterol and the bad fat in their blood and lost a little bit of weight.
That was rather encouraging and interesting, wasn't it? I mean, they were only on it for a week.
I mean, you can't draw too much scientific conclusion from that, but it was really interesting to see how they felt changing their diet. It was also really interesting to see how different people coped with it. Some actually said, this was like my diet anyway, I used to have these choices. Other people actually went, oh, this is really difficult to do. What's really encouraging is most of them lost weight. Most of them we saw a slight reduction in cholesterol. And I think the best thing we can say is this diet certainly caused no one any harm at all.
But if you existed on pretty much just this for the rest of your life, would that be better than our average diet? our average lifestyle?
I think for the vast majority of people who don't have certain medical conditions, this is a very good lifestyle diet for the general public. If you were eating this diet every single day, you would probably have a much better, healthier lifestyle than what we currently, most of us, do on a daily basis.
In the initial few days of weight loss, you will tend to lose weight quicker because your body will tend to lose water, particularly if you're cutting back on the carbohydrate in your diet, because your liver stores some carbohydrate, and with that carbohydrate, it stores 4 times its weight in water. So you can quite easily lose quite a lot of weight rapidly. In terms of things like, using things like butter, there's not a definite sort of ban on butter from dietitians. It's using it sensibly and not using too much of it. It's perfectly acceptable. It's a good idea because it's going to taste better. And if you enjoy the food, you're less likely to want to eat other things.
We did an admittedly not very scientific experiment where we had 5 people on a so-called healthy high-fat diet. Their cholesterol went down, some of them lost weight. Doesn't that suggest that actually you can have quite a healthy high-fat diet?
Something like coronary heart disease, it's a multifactorial disease. It's not only cholesterol that's important. It's blood pressure, whether you smoke, how much physical activity you do. And that's why I think focusing too much just on single nutrients is not helpful in terms of actually reducing your overall risk of heart disease.
What's your instinct about what the best diet for us now is and how much fat we should have?
Where the evidence seems to be going in terms of heart disease is actually towards whole diet approaches, and a really good way of describing that is the traditional Mediterranean diet. So there are fats in the diet, but they're healthy fats, so they are unsaturated fats, whether it's from the olive oil that we all associate with the Mediterranean diet or the polyunsaturated fats that come from things like fish and nuts. But along with that, there's lots of fruit and vegetables. There are whole grains, there are lean protein sources, but less red meat and less of the sugary and fatty treats that we eat so much of.
But this latest research about fat doesn't give us a license to eat huge fry-ups every day, of course, or to pour double cream down our throats, because the key to a healthy diet is still, as it's always been, about 3 things: moderation, eating less, and moving more.
Now, if you'd like more information on tonight's programme, please visit our website at itv.com/tonight. Until next time, good evening and